Hey, Brambro here, and this is a game which I've played before, but which I've not played on the channel. It is called Grand Tactician Civil War. It's been out for a while. It came out last year, so it's at least 6, maybe 8 months ago. I've, I've played a couple campaigns a little while back, but there's been some updates since the last time I played, so I thought I'd give another campaign a try. And I thought I'd record some episodes and kind of show what this game is about if y'all haven't seen it. There's plenty of videos on YouTube, of course, of this game, including by people who play it much better than I do. But anyway, I'm starting a new campaign and see how it goes. The most recent update to this game, it's on version 1.05 now, and so there's some things in here that I haven't seen. Some battle AI improvements, including some deployment and defensive behavior. We'll see. Army and fleet management improvements. That would be pretty helpful for fleet. That was a little clunky before. Fame system supply depots can be abandoned by the player now and the AI. That's good. Supply depots cost money. And as campaigns move along, you need one in a place for a while, and then later you don't need it so much, but it's still sucking up resources, so that's a good change. Bug fixes, balance improvements. I don't know if any of this other stuff I'd really registered before. The supply thing is a pretty big deal. And I'm looking forward to seeing what these management improvements are for armies and fleets. Okay. I think I will play Union. I think I will. So you have a number of start options. I'm going to go ahead and go with Summer 1861. If you go with Spring, basically you might get a couple policies selected early, but overall it's just kind of, there's a few months just before the war, and there's really, it's pretty limited what you can do. I'm just going to go with Summer 1861. And let's see here, industrialization. These are kind of the default that the Union starts with. If they're AI, and so you can, it's kind of what it gives you. You can change them. Definitely going to keep industrialization. I mean, that's kind of the, it's kind of the North's strength. Reinforcing the strengths of the side is, I think, a pretty good idea. So this will suck up a few resources into the west, which cannot be used directly against the Confederacy. At least that's the way it reads to me. However, I like that. I like the morale boost, and I like the military experience. Although the CSA gets it too, because, you know, all of their military experience comes out of the U.S. Army as well in 1861. And then this gives us basically a +5 support across the board in all of the loyal states, which is pretty good. The +25 in Kansas, that's nice to have as well, but that's one state without much population in it. It's really the +5 across the board that I like. This reduces the slave workforce in the CSA. So this isn't really a help the North so much as a hurt the South policy. And it looks like a pretty strong one. Northern support in California and Oregon. Population plus 20%. Recruitment made possible in said states, and trade capacity of the trails doubled. Recruitment made possible in said states. That could be awesome if there's actually a significant number of recruits available there. Or if it's tiny populations, that may not be a big deal. I just don't know. Southern support in all states within the Union minus 10. Compared to, I mean, that sounds pretty good, but compared to some of these others, I think that's fairly lackluster. Relations with Europe improved. Chance of intervention against the Union minus 10. And required for high-level diplomacy. I think I'm going to skip that one. As long as the northern state, as long as you go, there's a couple of regular policies in the tech tree, or the policy tree, I should say, not the tech tree. As long as you go with some pretty standard ones there, the risk of a European intervention is not very high. And I do kind of like the first level of diplomacy because it unlocks a good source of quality small arms for the army. But going up to level 4 to 5 diplomacy policies, I just don't see doing that. Kind of the same here. There's enough kind of regular policies available to keep relations with Europe good enough that intervention is remote, and pushing up to that high a level of agriculture seems unlikely. %50 less available ships and weapons. The ships I'm not that worried about. I mean, the Union starts with a pretty crushing naval superiority anyway. But if this can cut down on their available artillery and weaponry, that is not insignificant. And the whole idea of this game is to drive the other side's national morale low enough. That's essentially the win condition. So giving CSA a national morale minus 5 just out of the gate, that is not insignificant. That actually looks pretty good. Railroad built, the Union Pacific Railroad, controlling trade to the Pacific coast, but a +2 credit rating and plus 25% railroad transport capacity and construction speed. That's attractive. I haven't tried the security measures before. I think I did play one campaign with the railroad. And I think I played one with Go West before. I'm going to go with this one. So we're going to go with industrialization, Indian Wars, which the main thing I like there is Union morale and military experience. But those are kind of standard and kind of is my experimental that I haven't tried before, security measures. Okay. I think probably mediocre, which affects national morale, available recruits, experience gain. Morale, it actually affects a lot. And frankly, I've kind of played toward the easier levels before, so mediocre might be actually pretty hard to me. Aggressiveness, we'll kind of put it somewhere in the mid-range. Okay, yeah, we'll go mediocre for that too. All right, fog of war, yes. Readiness system, that'll become pretty clear once we get into it. But basically, it takes a while for newly formed units to become combat ready, and then if they've taken a lot of casualties, if they've been marching a lot, if morale's low, you know, they need to kind of regain readiness after some hard campaigning. I'm going to go ahead and turn order delays on, but I'm just not going to play with feuds. It's I'm just not. Without kind of explaining the whole thing and going off, in a nutshell, officers, generals of different backgrounds, West Point, political generals, they can get pissy with each other and have arguments that go on, and it reaches points where they just don't follow orders on the battlefield. Straight up. Just ignore them. Do whatever they want. Which is actually fairly realistic for this conflict. Probably compared to other eras, other conflicts, including some earlier eras, the level of kind of infighting and personal grudges and outright second guessing and outright insubordination during this particular conflict on both sides, really pretty shocking. But from a gameplay perspective, yeah, the first campaign I played, I had all this crap turned on, and yeah, I'll put up with the rest of this for realism's sake. But feuds, sorry, life's just too short, man. All right, let's get it kicked off. This is not a fast-paced game. There's a lot of kind of fiddling around on the campaign map, tweaking armies and stuff of that. I'll probably do a good bit of that off camera, but some of that will be on camera as well. And, you know, may go for a while and there's not a battle. You know, may have some episodes without a battle. And the battles themselves aren't necessarily quick affairs either. It kind of moves along at its own pace. Okay, it is July 1861. We are at war. When you're zoomed all the way out, flags are armies. And then if you zoom in a little bit, I think, yeah, I got to get used to how the map moves around. So the larger flags are field armies, and these smaller flags are forts. And just to kind of orient here, what do we got? And there's kind of a zoom in system where if you keep zooming in, it switches to more like a satellite view where you can see the terrain and such. All right, so we have a field army here. This is the main army. It's the Army of Northeastern Virginia, which is what the main Union Army was called in 1861. Army of the Potomac had not been created yet. And actually, at this stage of the war, the Army of the Potomac was the name of the main Confederate force in Northern Virginia. The Army of Northern Virginia, by that name, had not been created yet either. So this is the main Confederate Army, about almost 30,000 men. Or it will be 27,000 once it's up to strength. Right now, there's 19,000 troops there. And for our army, we've got a full basically 33,000. There's also some smaller armies over here. There is the Department of Pennsylvania, 18,000 troops here under Patterson. And then there is the Army of the Shenandoah here at Winchester, 14,000 men when up to strength. Currently estimated that there's 10,000 troops present. This game does, in addition to kind of fog of war, this game does have varying levels of intel where you can click on an enemy force, and now it says there up to strength 27,000, 19,000 present. That's an estimate. There may be a little bit more or a little bit less than that on either figure. And that guns number may not be exactly correct either. Nor do we know who the commander of that army is. Historically, it would have been Beauregard, but that's not necessarily the case here. And just like, if I'm not mistaken, Joseph Johnston would have been the commander of the Army of the Shenandoah at this stage. That doesn't mean that's actually who it is. However, it is historical for the Union armies, so I bet right at game start it probably is Beauregard and Johnston. But we don't know that for sure. And that's kind of how it stacks up in the East. The Union currently does not have an organized army in the West, meaning basically the Kentucky, Tennessee area. There is a small force out here, I believe. This is Arkansas. We've got a very small force, the Army of the West, out here in western Missouri under Nathaniel Lyon. And it's small. It's only 5,000 men. Somewhere out here, fog of war, we don't see it yet. I think we will pretty soon once the clock starts running. There is a Confederate force out here. I believe it's called the Western Army, maybe around Fort Smith. It might be up here near this crossroads. And as I recall, I believe it's probably larger than our Army of the West. And then we have a small force here under McClellan of about 7,000 men in what is still Western Virginia. One of our early goals would be to flip Western Virginia and have it become a separate state, West Virginia. In order to do that, I think it's here, capture Western Virginia. In order to do that, we need to control Wheeling, Grafton, and Charleston, Virginia, and defeat any Confederate armies there. Once that happens, the loyal citizens break away from the Confederacy and eventually join the Union as a free state. It actually happens pretty quick. And that will pop CSA national morale down a bit. And will create an additional state from which recruits can be gathered. And right here at the start, we already control Grafton and Wheeling. This is basically just 1,000 militia here. But Charleston is down here. It's still Confederate. And the nature of the roads and the terrain and the supply levels in Western Virginia is such that capturing this place is a little bit harder than it may look, just because it may not, it's not very far, but even fairly small units, armies, tend to run out of supply pretty quick in all this undeveloped land and forest and so forth. But basically, the mission of these two units will be to execute controlling Charleston, Western Virginia, by capturing Charleston. Marching straight down here to do that is probably not the best way to do it. And then the other thing is, there's a railroad that does cut here across West Virginia. So that has impact on supply, and it also has impact on mobility. So the first thing, in my opinion, is to secure this road and railroad. So before heading down here to take Charleston, I think we're probably going to do a bit of fort building along this corridor so that the Confederate Army of Shenandoah, or some other force that we have not yet gotten visibility on, can't come in here and kind of muck things up. And then finally, the naval situation. We probably have, let's just take a look here. Yeah, there are several squadrons: Atlantic Blockade Squadron, Potomac Flotilla, that's in the Chesapeake Bay. There's a Gulf Blockading Squadron, the beginnings, one ship, of a Mississippi River Squadron, a second Atlantic Squadron, a third Atlantic Squadron, a second Gulf Squadron, and a third Gulf Squadron. And so basically, zoom all the way out here. The idea there is to establish a blockade of the Confederacy, and there's a number of pretty prominent ports. First of all, there's Virginia, primarily Norfolk, and then the ports associated with Richmond. There's North Carolina, primarily Wilmington, but there's also a port here at Morehead City. Savannah and Charleston here. Jacksonville, Florida here. And then in the Gulf, there's Pensacola, Mobile, New Orleans, Galveston. And there's a few other ports, but those are the main ones. And that's why we've got several blockading squadrons, so that the idea is to blockade them. And we have a number of ships that are in reserve that are not assigned to any of these squadrons. Right. So this squadron's got 119. That squadron's already pretty strong. But there's also a bunch of little steamers that we could use on the rivers instead. This Potomac Flotilla is basically a not all of them. Most of these ships are also river capable. Not very many ships, but the ones that are here are fairly strong. especially this steam frigate. That's about 2/3 of its combat power right here. This squadron is basically just kind of a cadre. It's not really a combat force yet, but here's just something to build on. That's a pretty strong squadron. That's a pretty strong squadron. Those are both well over 100 guns. That one's very strong. It's probably the strongest one in the Navy. Almost 100 guns. But I think what I'm going to do is the blockading squadrons don't need a river capability. And there are a number of ships in all of these blockading squadrons which are riverine capable. Basically, the second, third, and fourth rate steamers, those can go on rivers. Third rate steamer here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to pull all of these smaller steamer type ships back into the ships in harbor, which is basically the pool. And things like frigates and steam frigates and so forth. These are seagoing ships with lots of guns. And I think that's all we need in the blockade squadrons, which stay at sea and don't proceed up rivers. One thing I've noticed in the past is that the AI doesn't tend to build ironclads. So I think these older technology, like the steam frigates and even the regular just plain sail frigates, frankly, they're pretty good in this game. Should it be that way? Probably not. At least not maybe at the beginning, but as the conflict proceeds, there should be an increasing pressure and incentive to build a lot of ironclads. And as far as I've seen, there really isn't. So it's at some point I'm going to go through, and I'll probably do it off camera, but I'm going to kind of rework all of these squadrons to get seagoing ships into the blockade squadrons, pull all the riverine ships out, and use those, and then form some pretty strong river units for the Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. But I'm not going to do all that on camera right now. What I will do, however, is go ahead and we gotta, okay. I don't think, oh yeah. At yellow readiness, you are blockade capable. You do need a readiness, you gotta be at least yellow readiness to do a fleet order like that. And this large circle, the small circle basically is the engagement range. If an enemy fleet, like this one right here, the James River Squadron, enters this small circle, there will be a battle. The large circle is command radius, which basically, if a battle occurs within the large circle, this fleet may go reinforced and get pulled into that battle. Or if this fleet is blockading, which it now is, basically every enemy port within this large radius is blockaded. So right now from here we're blockading Anancock, which is a little bitty port on the eastern shore, and Norfolk. Or the actual port is Gosport Shipyard, which is right across the river from Norfolk. But if we could just move this fleet a little bit inward, right about there, then we will also cover these smaller river ports up closer to Richmond. Even though right here we're still considered in a sea area, not a riverine area. And so right now in this area, of course, Richmond is the Confederate capital and the capital of the state of Virginia. And the Confederates hold Norfolk, which is the main seaport and naval base, including up to just a couple of weeks ago, U.S. naval base. Now it's a Confederate naval base. But right across the river, the Union still holds Fort Monroe and the port of Hampton. So hopefully we will keep it that way with the presence of this strong squadron. This second squadron here, primarily I think, yeah, there's 2 ports in the area. This one's hard to see because the fort blocks it out, but right behind Fort Macon is the port of it says Morehead Port. It's called Morehead City, North Carolina. But that's a fairly small one. This is Wilmington. This is the one that we want to, this is the priority to blockade. But from here, we can cover both. This squadron, Savannah and Charleston, are both pretty important, and from here we can cover both. Get that blockade going. Now that does leave Jacksonville, or more specifically Fernandina, which is the associated port. This is uncovered. And I've tried before to try to squeak it out where we can get Charleston on one end and Fernandina on the other, and nope, can't quite do it. So at some point later I may create another squadron to cover this, but for now Savannah and Charleston are the priority. And then over here we want to make sure that we've got New Orleans covered. That is probably the Confederacy's biggest port. And how do you quantify that? So if I click on this port, and what we see here, it shows you all the goods that go in and out of the port. And then it reflects here sales tax and tariffs. So a positive 76,000 is currently directly feeding into the Confederate coffers out of this port. And I think this is still because it's very early. That actually seems like a pretty low number. What we got at Mobile? 72,000. Pensacola, 64,000. I think we need to kind of tuck. There's also this little port here, Biloxi. That's only 9,000. I believe once the game starts running and the economy actually starts, the game actually starts calculating the economy and everything, these numbers will go up. And it's kind of a similar situation. I don't think I can tuck this fleet up here where it can cover New Orleans and Pensacola. Maybe from right here I could, but that's pretty close to a fort. It's not shown because technically it's not visible, but there is a fort there. And if there's one thing I've learned, navies do not do well against forts unless there's a whole lot of support. So I think our priority is going to be New Orleans and Mobile. So we'll move this squadron over here, and that should cover New Orleans. New Orleans is a tough nut to crack. There's 2 forts down here, downriver. There's 1 fort here. This is all just horrendous terrain. It's all swamp. So making a landing down here is unrealistic. And in fact, the supply mechanics, even getting a force all the way around Florida and over here to even try a landing, it's pretty tough to do. So repeating the historical trend of capturing New Orleans itself pretty early, which was in early 1862, that is not easy to do in this game, just from a logistics standpoint. It's not just the defenses, it's just even getting an army here in any kind of cohesive state is prohibitive. Okay, so then that leaves another little squadron over here. We could go for Tampa. There's a port here at Cedar Key, which I think is today called Panama City, right around in this area. But if we compare Tampa that's 45,000 at Cedar Key. That is not insignificant. We got here at Pensacola, 4.2. And Pensacola is 64. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move this squadron over to cover Pensacola and whatever this is. So it's actually pretty close to these 2 Gulf blockade squadrons are actually pretty close, going to be pretty close to each other. About there, I think. Oops. Not forget to turn the blockade on for that squadron. And when I go and rework all these squadrons, I'm probably going to rename them just to make it more immediately obvious which one's which. Like I'll probably rename this something like Louisiana Blockade, and this one will be Florida Blockade or Pensacola Blockade or something like that. And then there's one final squadron over here. Not all that terribly big, but we're going to want this on Galveston. And so the naval strategy for this game, throughout the game, is just going to be organizing, strengthening, maintaining the blockade of the Confederate ports. We've already got enough to kind of cover the big ones. and they will impose a fairly high percentage blockade even at the start. But I'm going to add ships to them in such a way that we want to get up to 100%. And then maybe make a few additional squadrons to cover these ports that we do not have blockaded. Most notably Jacksonville, probably the biggest one that needs to be covered. Alternatively, hopefully fairly early in the war, we may recapture Norfolk and these associated ports down here, which would then obviate the need to blockade them. And these little riverine ports up here can be covered just by this one Potomac flotilla. That would free up this blockade squadron, move further down the coast, and kind of shuttle everything down and give us more ships to cover the remaining ports. I do not know what burning down. I think that could mean. I think the Confederacy is burning down this supply depot. That's a new 1.05 thing. I haven't seen that before. That would imply that this general, presumably Beauregard, doesn't intend to stay here. We've got 33,000 men here in this army commanded by McDowell. Let's just have a look at his. Let's just have a look at the organization here. Five divisions of varying size. Tyler, Hunter, Heinzelman, Miles, and Runyon. At least 2 infantry brigades apiece. 3rd Division has got 3 brigades. 1st Division has got 4 brigades. I think we better get down here and fight this army and hopefully defeat it and force it to retreat before this supply depot is destroyed. And it's an upgraded supply depot. And that is going to remain very relevant for quite a long time as we move on toward Fredericksburg and across the Rappahannock. Well, what will probably happen is we will engage our 33 versus this at least 19, maybe a little bit more. But then this army may pop right down this railroad and join that battle. So one option could be cross the river here with this force. Take Harper's Ferry. Threaten Winchester. Potentially engaging the Army of the Shenandoah. And prevent it from reinforcing the Army of the Potomac. The question is, if I march across here, A, do I have enough readiness? I don't know. B, do I defeat the Army of the Shenandoah? It's kind of even. It says 10,000, but I suspect it's a little bit more than that. And C, when this army does retreat, which way does it go? If it goes back up the valley, fine. But if it crosses over anyway, basically I just made happen what I'm trying to prevent. In any case, that will wait for the next episode. What I'm going to do off camera in between is I'm going to fiddle around with fleets. I'm going to see if there's any kind of tweaking I can do with the organizations of these armies. I'll probably start in motion my plan for Western Virginia, which frankly is probably just going to involve, before anything else, just building a fort here. Kind of figure out what I'm going to do with the Army of the West. My main goal, my short-term goal for the West is got to make sure that St. Louis is protected. First and foremost. Basically, the rest of Missouri, yeah, whatever. I mean, you know, I don't want it all to go Confederate, but you know, it's just whatever. Basically, 80% or more of the value of the state of Missouri is right here at St. Louis. This needs to be protected. It's a pretty large city. It is, and of course, obviously, it is pretty important for control of the upper reaches of the Mississippi River. Longer term, mid-term, and long term, the idea, of course, will be to extend control all the way down the river up to and including the capture of New Orleans. But before we can do that, got to safeguard St. Louis and got to safeguard Cairo, Illinois. Cairo by itself, it's small, but its position right here where the Ohio and the Mississippi come together, and close to where the Cumberland and the Tennessee, this control of this area is pretty important for the Tennessee and Kentucky campaign, for the eventual push down the Mississippi. So first things first, protect St. Louis, protect Cairo, and then build from there. The Riverine Squadron, it's currently stationed here, but basically that's going to operate out of Cairo, Illinois. And then I may or may not kind of get an army started recruiting, either in Kentucky or perhaps southern Indiana. So that'll do for this episode. That's an overview of kind of where we'll be going from here. One other thing that I'll mention that I'll also probably do off camera is officers. There's basically several different flavors of officers. You've got West Point graduates, like this guy here. This is Brigadier General John Pope, historical figure. Most of these are historical figures. There's a few kind of game-generated ones, especially at the lower ranks, but most of these were real dudes. And so, and they have various traits. You know, were they an engineer in the pre-war army, artillery, cavalry, West Point graduate? This guy, as many of them are, veteran of the Mexican War. Some of these, let me see if I can find one in here real quick. Some of these guys are basically, they owe their position to politics rather than military experience, right? They're big movers and shakers in their home states. They got pull. A lot of them are congressmen or ex-governors, etc., so forth. I'm not finding one. They're here somewhere. Well, you can select for these. There, okay. These guys, politically assigned. So you put these guys in command, and that makes their home state happy, right? Like this guy, he's John McClernand from Illinois. So McClernand in command increases support in Illinois, which in turn means increased recruitment levels and volunteerism. So, you want political officers in command. A few of them are actually pretty good. Like, it's perfectly fine to have them in command of a division or a brigade in the field army. Others are, at least from a military perspective, they might be a really good lawyer or insurance executive, railroad executive, but they're not very good generals. And so you want them in command, but you don't want them basically in a position where they can goon things up and cause problems. Luckily for such guys, we've got a whole bunch of forts. So if I've got a dunderhead that I don't really want in the Army of the Potomac or the Army of the Tennessee, maybe command at Fort Niagara would be a good place for him. It still counts as command, still counts as independent command. It'll make Illinois or Connecticut or New York happy, but he's not going to cause a lot of problems there. So another thing I'm probably going to do off camera is kind of go through the political generals and the ones which aren't very attractive as far as their other traits, leadership, admin, that sort of thing. And for the political generals, that's a lot of them. I'm gonna make a lot of fort command assignments with those guys. Anyway, so that's kind of the plan for what I'm going to do off camera, and then we'll keep going in the next episode, which will probably involve the meeting of our Army of Northeastern Virginia and the Confederate Army of the Potomac. Until then, thanks for watching.